Welcome to Sacred Heart Chapel and our audio tour of Sacred Heart Chapel. This chapel is really an icon here at LMU. It represents so much for us, for the university. A number of people refer to Sacred Heart Chapel as the spiritual center of campus, and I certainly agree with that. I can think back to so many important events held here during the history of the university, including most recently the inaugural Mass for President Timothy Law Schneider. Loyola University originally had its campus on Venice Boulevard, which included the high school, the university, and the law school. In 1929, developer Henry Culver made an offer to the president of Loyola University, Father Sullivan. If Father Sullivan was willing to come out to Westchester, build 2 buildings, and start classes within 2 years, then Mr. Culver would give the university 100 acres out here on the bluff. Now, people at that time really thought that Father Sullivan was crazy to move from downtown LA out here to no man's land. If you take a look in University Hall, you'll see pictures of the dirt road that was Manchester Avenue. But Father Sullivan was a visionary, and he moved out here, and he really had great plans for the university. However, it was 1929, and shortly after they made the deal, the stock market crashed. So many of the people that had offered money to build the young university were not able to follow through on their promises. So the first 2 buildings, Xavier Hall and St. Robert's Hall, were really the only major buildings on the campus for a very long time. Sacred Heart Chapel was really the 3rd major building that the university was able to build. It was built in 1953 by a long-term president here at LMU by the name of Father Charlie Casassa. As a matter of fact, Father Casassa was president of the university when I was an undergraduate here in the late 1960s. Father Casassa really wanted to build a chapel because he thought it was so important to the identity of Loyola and to the mission of our school. Sacred Heart Chapel is a Catholic church, and as you enter through the center doors of the church, you will notice the central wooden altar, as well as a larger marble altar elevated behind it. The front altar is the altar of sacrifice, which is used for the Mass. The altar behind was actually the old altar. We call it the high altar. And that was where the Mass was originally said. In 1991, I was pastor of the church, and I removed the pews in the front part of the chapel, and we built the green platform, the altar, and the ambo, the podium. We did that primarily to bring the celebration of the Eucharist closer to the people. An interesting story about the altar and the ambo is that when I was renovating the chapel, after we put in new lighting controls, and a sound system, we didn't have enough money to build an altar. So I went to one of the faculty members at the time, a Jesuit, Father Mike Ing, and he said to me, "Well, my father does carpentry as a hobby. Maybe he could help out." Sure enough, about 4 months later, an altar and an ambo suddenly arrived at the university from Father Mike Ing's dad. They are both completely handmade and absolutely beautiful pieces. Another thing you might notice as you come into the chapel is the wooden screen or wall in the back, which has the crucifix on it. This is called a rood screen. In older European churches, it was used to separate the monks from the body of the church. You see, these medieval churches were the biggest buildings in town. So not only did you have Mass in these buildings, but you would also have many other activities, people selling things and making a lot of noise. So the rood screen was there to keep these happenings away from the monks' more intentional activities and worship. What's interesting is that when the chapel was originally built, there was no crucifix in that arch because, as was often the case, there was no money for it. And then after a couple of years, they got the money, and that's when the crucifix was added. One thing that is very unique about the chapel is the windows. They were put in over the course of a number of years, not all at the same time. The window in the back, the center window, is of Christ the King. The left-hand window is Mary, and the right-hand window is Joseph. There are 27 windows, with Jesuits who had been named saints at the time. The first two were St. Ignatius Loyola and St. Francis Xavier. They are in the order of them being named saints, going from the upper left-hand corner of the church as you face the altar around to the right-hand side. Since that time, the number of Jesuit saints has multiplied to several hundred. You will also notice at the bottom of the windows there are seals of the 27 Jesuit colleges in the United States, established at the time the chapel was built. Now, if you know your history, you're going to tell me that there are 28 Jesuit colleges in the United States, and you're right. However, Wheeling College in West Virginia is the newest Jesuit college, and it was established in 1954, a year after the chapel was actually built. When the merger took place between Loyola University and Marymount College, there wasn't room for any more seals on the upper windows. So Father Tom O'Malley, who was president at the time, included in the two side chapels the seals of the Marymount colleges, as well as the seal of Wheeling College. The seals of the colleges and universities are laid out in chronological order, just as the saints had been laid out. Besides the beautiful windows on top, there are side windows down below, and these windows feature certain individuals and symbols which represent areas of study within the university. So, for example, we see Faraday, who was the developer of electricity. We have Marconi, who invented the radio. Lafont, the famous French designer and architect. Da Vinci, the incredible Renaissance man who was a scientist, artist, and inventor. Sixtus V, the Pope who codified the law of the Church. St. Thomas More, who was a lawyer martyred in England. Louis Pasteur, who discovered bacteria and germs. And we have Dante, the famous writer. You will notice there are two small chapels off the body of the church. The left-hand side chapel, as you face the altar, is dedicated to St. Francis Xavier. Next to St. Ignatius Loyola, Francis Xavier is probably the most famous Jesuit because he was made the patron saint of missionaries. St. Ignatius, very early on in the life of the young Jesuit order, sent Xavier on a mission to China, and he went around Asia through India and preached and baptized along the way. Sadly, he never made it to China. He died on an island off the coast, but his legacy certainly lives on. These beautiful windows here on the side were put in by Father Tom O'Malley, one of our presidents. Understandably, when we went from an all-male school to a coeducational school, he wanted to include some women in the windows of the chapel, so he chose some significant female saints, as well as the seals of the Marymount schools. So the chapel on the right-hand side is dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Churches are usually named after saints or after Christ in some way or another. So this chapel is named after Christ, particularly the Sacred Heart. This was a very significant devotion that the Jesuits promoted because it reminds us that Jesus is both human and divine. The heart is the symbol of that human love, that human compassion, that human tenderness that God has for us. There are people today who have a vision of God as the strong and angry person in heaven. And so the devotion to the Sacred Heart was really promoted to point out that God in heaven is the God who sent Jesus to live among us, offer his life for us, and through Scripture offer us faith. You will notice there is a basket on the altar. We offer the opportunity for people to send in prayer requests online. And so those prayers come to campus ministry. They are printed up and brought over here to the chapel and placed on this altar. When Mass is said in the church or other prayer services are held, the people who have sent in these prayers and their intentions are remembered. One thing I'm rather proud of here in the chapel is the organ, which we got 3 years ago. If you've ever been to a liturgy here, you know how rich and wonderful the organ sounds. It's the newest model from the company Rogers, and it actually has tones recorded and mimicked from significant churches all over the world. St. Paul's in London, Notre Dame in Paris, St. Peter's in Rome. So when the digital organ is played, these are the sounds that come out. Now you may look up at the pipes and think, how does the organ connect to the pipes? Well, it doesn't. The integrity of the digital sound was so good and so strong that there was really no need to use the pipes. They're really there as decoration. Another beautiful piece here in the chapel are the Stations of the Cross, right under the stained glass windows. You'll notice they're done in a particular kind of mosaic, rather unique. The stations are 13 parts to the Lord's Passion and Death. A person makes the Stations of the Cross by moving around the chapel and praying a particular prayer at each station. On either side in the middle of the chapel, you'll notice little rooms with glass windows. These are the confessionals. Here at LMU on Wednesday evenings, we offer the Sacrament of Reconciliation, confession. There is a priest here at 10 o'clock at night who hears confessions. You can come and celebrate the sacrament in these confessional rooms. Thank you for taking this tour of Sacred Heart Chapel. I hope you have enjoyed it. God bless.